Well, welcome back, everyone. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Mr. Clint Hughes. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for coming. I appreciate you coming to my humble shop here.
Oh, yeah, no,
Even though
it's
it's a little
awesome.
dirty, a little dusty, but
No, it's fantastic. We're
yeah,
joined by many a piano.
indeed.
So, quick introduction on you. You were educated at the Musicians Institute.
Yeah, I went for a year and a half.
Okay.
So I grew up in northern Michigan, and I went out to Los Angeles. I was going to be a rock star, so I played guitar since I was 13 or so, and
Okay.
went out there and went through the college and everything. That was fun, but it wasn't like a 4-year institution or anything.
Got it.
But
Yeah.
that's all the higher education I've had in my
Yes.
life is how to stand in front of a stage and
And sing.
and pose.
Yes. And then you've been the owner of Grand American Piano, whose shop we are in and whose pianos we are surrounded by
That's right.
for quite a while now.
About 30 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a long time, and I absolutely love what I do. It was started out many years ago in sales. So I went out to Los Angeles, went to school, had grandiose ideas of changing the world, and then I got hungry, right? And so I had to get a job, and I got a job at Guitar Center out there selling guitars.
Yeah.
And excuse me. And then I got kind of bored of that. And then a couple doors down was this little piano store. And I just walked in and I says, I think I can sell pianos. Give me a shot. So I did that. And then I worked for Steinway for a couple of years. But I like working with my hands. And I would notice that these 100-year-old pianos would come in on trade. I'd sell a Steinway
Right.
and then bring them one on trade. And then it would disappear for 6 months or so. And then it would come back. And it was amazing. It was refinished, restored, basically, refinished, restrung, all that kind of stuff. And I quickly learned that a lot of these older pianos, 100-year-old, 120-year-old pianos, fully restored, were far better than the vast majority of pianos new. And they came in at about a third of the price. And I was just like, I couldn't believe it, And so, again, I liked working with my hands. So I served a little bit of an apprenticeship with an old German guy. Daniel was his name. He was specialized in the Hamburg Steinway factory in Germany. And he taught me how to restring and how to regulate actions and build actions and pianos and stuff like that. And so early on, I just fell in love with that. I realized that a restored piano is, if it's fully restored, is every bit as nice of a piano as the vast majority of newer instruments, and they're actually affordable. And so and then I kind of got into restoration, branched out on my own. And I've never looked back. I've been doing that ever since.
Yeah. You mentioned actions. Let's talk a little bit. How does a piano actually work?
Okay, so
Because we've got one opened up here behind us.
right. Well, so this is about 100-year-old Gabler and Brothers. It's just one of hundreds of old American pianos, and we're currently working on this one. This is more of a mission style, so the real courtesan oak, and you see, the old kind of straight lines around it. Really wonderful old piano. This one it's been restrung. I restored the keyboard, and then the action goes here. It's not in there yet, but new hammers, all new action parts. So there's about 12,000 parts in a piano. It's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Golly.
And about 9,000 of them are in what's called the action. So the action is like the motor of the piano. It literally is what connects the player to the instrument. Yeah.
Got it.
So they sit down, they hit the keys go down, they push the hammers, and the hammers hit the strings. All of that is the action.
What's called the action?
Like the engine.
Got it.
Yeah. So generally speaking, a piano can be broken down into 3 different areas. You have the case, which is just aesthetics. It has nothing to do with the sound, but a lot of these older pianos just courtesan, beautiful
Right.
mahoganies,
Yeah.
walnuts, oak, and then the strings. Now, when a piano is in tune, and you got to forgive me, I still have remnants of Fauci's flu.
Me as well. Yes.
It just went through not
Yes.
contagious anymore, but that cough just lingers and lingers and lingers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when a piano is just sitting there in your living room in tune, yeah, it's under about 40,000 pounds of string tension. It's pretty amazing. 20 tons.
Good golly.
And and the things that hold the strings in tune are the tuning pins, and they're, a couple inches long. They're pounded into a piece of wood called the pin block, and that pin block holds all the tension of the strings. It's really amazing. It's a
Right.
modern marvel. 40,000 pounds, right?
Yeah.
Not like a
That's
guitar.
nuts.
I mean, it's really, yeah. Now, the average life of those tuning pins are right about 80, 90 years, 100 years, and they're at the end of their life. So what happens is the piano needs to be tuned more often, and then ultimately the strings wrapped around the tuning pins, and then the pins just start to slip. So the tuner will come and he'll tune, and then they'll just kind of slip back down. It can't be tuned anymore. Yeah. So that's in a restoration, that's kind of the only non-negotiable part. When a piano can't be tuned, then it's not really a piano, So
Right.
any piano this old, this is about 100 years old, 110 years old, and it has original strings, it needs to be replaced, right? And so that's the first thing you have to do is take all the strings out, repair the soundboard and all that other stuff, and then you put the new strings in. So you'll hear sounds here. My son is stringing a piano right now in the background. He's pounding these pins back into the pin block,
Got it.
So the strings, second area, and that's a real critical part. Most people, they find an old piano for free on Craigslist or something, and they just think
They're
it needs to be
excited.
tuned,
Yeah.
but it's more than that. A lot of times they try to tune it, it doesn't tune, and it just needs restoration,
Got it.
but it's still amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
it's still amazing that it holds a tune for that long. So case is the first area, the strings and the soundboard and the plate that holds all that tension is the other area. And then the action, as you mentioned, that's the third part. And that's the thing that literally connects you to the instrument. And most people, they hear a piano and they understand that, but a player actually feels it too. So it's a combination of the way the piano sounds and feels that's either going to inspire or not inspire you to play,
Yeah.
So a full restoration includes replacing all of the disposable parts. Yeah. So
Got it.
there's some parts in a piano that are mainstay, the case, obviously, the soundboard. I'm an advocate of keeping the original soundboard because that's where the sound comes from. That's kind of the soul of the piano,
Right.
So if I can repair the old original soundboard and refinish that, keep it as opposed to putting a new soundboard in it. I think it sounds, the older ones sound better, and then everything that moves in the action, the hammers hit the strings, they're connected to a shank, and all the internal parts, they all move, and they're made of wood and felt and all kinds of things. And over the decades, wood
Corrodes.
warps and
Right. Yep.
the metal parts corrode and all that stuff. And so a full restoration, you go through and you actually replace all of the moving parts, and then the piano's like new again. Yeah. I mean, if you don't mind me saying, your family piano, that Steinway in your house, that was over 100 years old, and that's been fully restored. It's got a new
sounds
Renner
amazing.
action in there.
Yeah.
It sounds good. It feels good. It looks good. All that, and that's indicative of a full restoration
Right.
on a piano. Yeah.
So when you're talking about like the case here,
Mm-hmm.
the older cases were all made of wood, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
But there are some new pianos where it's glass or plastic or anything like that. Why was it originally wood?
So they used to use something called lumber core. A lot of people think that it's solid wood. If all the parts were made out of solid wood, they would warp over the years. So what they have, or what they had way back then, and what you still have in some of the real high-end furniture. I mean, you really have to get up into the $15,000, $20,000 tables and stuff to have what's called lumber core wood. So you have 3/8 inch or so of a piece of wood, and then you have a thinner, it's a plywood basically, but it's all hardwood, deciduous trees that are cut. And when you make it out of lumber core, then that's why the old lids and everything stay exactly straight. There's no warping or anything on them because they're made out of lumber core. So you would have the 3/8 inch or so, then you would have a couple plies on that, and then over that is the veneer. So this is veneer on most
Okay.
of a piano. You see, and this veneer is cut obviously from big, back then, first generation trees. Like, so this oak here, This was felled 120 years ago. The tree was massive. It was big, first generation. Uh, and it was probably 3, 4, 500 years old then. Yeah.
Right.
And then they quarter saw. You know what quarter saw
No.
wood? Okay, so you have a piece of wood. It's porous, fun to know.
Yeah, yeah.
About that big around. Usually they'll put it on a cutter, on a bandsaw, and they'll just what's called plane sawing. It'll just cut straight through. And you get some grain, it looks nice. But if you take that piece of wood and you cut it down the middle and then you turn and you quarter it, yeah?
Yep.
Then you take those quarters and you turn them and you cut those. What you end up getting is all of the cross grain and stuff. So this is
Got it.
quarter sawn oak. And you don't
yeah,
get
yeah,
that
yeah.
unless you turn it.
Right, and
Yeah,
there's the
so you have to
rings.
quarter it, then you turn it, then you cut the veneer, and that's what you see here.
Got
Yeah,
it.
and that's what a lot of these older ones are. So almost all of the old pianos, it doesn't have to be a Steinway. All of them. This is a Gabler. Nobody's ever heard of Gabler. It's just a good old New York made piano back in the day. This is all quarter sawn, beautiful tiger oak, and all of the big wood panels are made out of that out of the lumber core wood. Yeah.
Got it.
Today, you get a lot of particle board. You've heard of that, right? Where they just basically take sawdust and then
Yeah.
they just compress it. MDF kind of stuff that you get at
Right.
the hardware store. It's incredibly heavy. It doesn't last as long, but you can do it because pianos today are more made to fit a price point. Okay. When they made this piano, it was just fundamentally a different philosophy. Okay. Back then, this is back before radio and television, before iPhones, right?
Good golly.
This was the centerpiece of the home.
Right.
So the kids played, the parents played, the grandparents played, everybody played, right? This was the centerpiece of the home, the parlor piano in the parlor room. And this is where the memories were created.
Yeah.
Right? Today you have everybody just kind of on their phones, and
The TV is the center of the house. Right.
yeah, and that began in the 1950s. So you if you understand the history of the 20th century in America, you'll understand kind of why the American piano kind of declined. So back then, this was people's priority because everybody played, right? So if you built a shoddy piano back then, you were quickly out of business.
Right.
Yeah. And then obviously radio came along, and then they all gathered around the radio, and then the piano kind of was in the background. And then television, like you mentioned, and then now computers and phones and all that kind of stuff. People's focus shifted. Yeah, their
Right.
priorities shifted. And through the decades, the attention span got shorter. As you know, I know your sister plays the harp wonderfully. I don't know if you've taken any lessons. You need a lot of patience, right?
Yes.
Back then, everybody had patience, and
Yep.
it was just a lot.
I used to take piano.
You used to take piano.
Yeah.
So you know that if you don't put a half hour a day, an hour a day in kind of thing, and who's got the time for that these days, right? Everybody's too busy, doing podcasts and stuff. They don't have time
How dare they?
time to play piano. But back then, everybody played, right?
Right.
And so the demand was high. The pianos were amazing. And then again, with radio, television, and everything else, homes got smaller. The piano got more relegated to something that, us rebuilders call them PSOs, piano-shaped objects. That's what people are looking for. They want that glossy black little baby grand that
Right.
they can get for $6,000 or $7,000 that they can put their picture frames on, right? I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that it's people's priorities are different.
Right.
The building pianos, the philosophy of building pianos today is just fundamentally different than it was back then. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's why they use MDF. That's why they use particle board. I've seen some even big Yamaha pianos that have been damaged that have come in for repair, and it's compressed paper, where they would just take recycled paper and they would
That's
glue
not
it up,
good.
and they would do the shiny black finish on it because
Yeah.
and that's what it was. That's what it was. Now, if you make it out of real wood, the soundboard, solid spruce and all that stuff, you're going to get an awesome sounding piano. But again, the vast majority of people that buy pianos today, doesn't really care if
They're not
on a
playing
scale
it.
of 1 to 10, a Steinway's a 10 and a young Chang is a 3. If that young Chang can sit in their living room and hold their pictures and it's in their price range, then that's what they're going to do. So
Right.
a fundamentally different supply and demand. And that's
Yeah.
why you have the particle board and the, so I'm not trying to cast aspersions on new piano builders, you know what I mean? But they're just building for a different consumer.
Different reason.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what makes a Steinway a 10 and a
Yeah.
young Chang a 1?
Well,
What's the difference between
the
those?
first thing is the raw materials
Okay.
that they use. So there are certain species of woods that are going to be better than others, right? Fundamentally, the soundboard. So the soundboard runs parallel with the strings. That's that piece of wood that you see back there.
Yep.
And that resonates. So when you hit a note, the string vibrates, the bridge pulls the sound down to the soundboard, and the soundboard vibrates in syncopation
Right.
with
How thick is it? Is it
quarter inch or
Okay.
so. It's
Yeah,
not,
tiny.
and spruce is very light wood, very
Right.
very light wood. Now, in the West here, the best woods are spruce, not only spruce but Sitka spruce from Sitka, Alaska. So they still, back then, the trees were just abundant, and they would fell them and they would have them, and there was an incredible amount of raw materials that they were able to use. So even though this is a real high-end piano, back in the day, it could be built for relatively,
Cheap.
affordably.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it still was from these first generation trees, right?
Right.
It was still really, really nice. A lot, the maples that they use for the rims. So the rims that, either the panels on the uprights or the rims on the grand pianos, they cut them
Got it.
1/8 inch or so, and then they bend them. You can't bend
Yeah.
solid wood. You have a bunch of plies. If you look under your Steinway, you'll see just a bunch of different, smaller, long pieces of maple that is bent around. That's a really hard, solid wood, and a kind of a bright wood that is the sound is going to reflect that. So when the sound travels down the bridge into the soundboard and it resonates, the older the piano gets, the more the sound goes into the case of the piano. And so by the time it's 100, 120 years old, the whole piano becomes kind of a speaker at that point, So you have that on one end of the spectrum, and on the other end, you have just the cheaper wood that can be had for a lot less money. Again, building to fit a price point, right? Young Chang or Samick or a lot of the Korean and Chinese companies, they know that they have the magic number for building and finishing a piano to send it to a dealer is, let's say, $4,000. It costs the dealer $4,000. They have to build everything in that. So if you
Right.
if you can find cheaper wood, you're going to get cheaper wood, and you're going to build it.
So
and then
your
the
profits
dealer
are
will
higher.
turn
Yeah.
around and they'll retail it for $8,000, probably sell it for $7,000, and they make their profit. But the woods, a lot of times on some of the very inexpensive newer pianos, the soundboard isn't even solid spruce; it's laminated. Because it's cheaper just to take wood and glue it up and laminate it.
Right.
Well, when you have laminated wood, it's just not going to resonate. It's not going to, move in sympathy with the the tone, the notes. It's not going to be as full sounding. Yeah. But then again, it doesn't necessarily have to be if you're never going to play it, if it's just going to sit there.
Right.
So that's, again, going to philosophy. So the biggest factor is the quality of the raw materials,
Okay.
So two things. So back then there was an abundance of it, right? First generation trees everywhere. The country was still young, and you had, and especially in Alaska, you had forests and just, thousands and thousands of square miles of forest that they could use these old growth trees, right? And they have since planted, and they have, second and third generation trees that they're using now. But back then it was so abundant that you didn't have to pay top dollar for it. Now Steinway, which still builds a very nice piano, but the raw materials that it takes to build a new Steinway piano is insane
Yeah.
because there's just a lot less of it than there used to be.
Right.
Right? Supply demand. So they're paying a huge amount for the wood that they know is going to be the best sounding wood that money can buy.
Yeah.
So once you put all that in there, then that's why they have to charge $100,000 for a new Steinway grand piano.
Right.
Your grand, it's a Model A 6.2, that they still build those, and they're 6 digits. It's a lot of money.
A lot of money.
And it's not because Steinway's trying to
Rip everyone off.
Exactly right. It's not that at all. It's a fair price for what it costs them to build it.
Yeah.
And it costs them that to build it because there's far less of the raw material available to them.
Got it.
And they pay a premium, and the dealer pays a premium, and the consumer ultimately pays a premium.
But even if the wood is super expensive, doesn't mean it's the right wood to make it sound.
Yeah,
correct.
you have to have the right wood. So yeah, usually the rims are made out of maple. You bent the maple. The soundboard is the most important part, because that's the spruce, right?
Right.
Most of the keys are made out of spruce wood.
Or they're not made out of ivory anymore.
Well, so the tops of I'll just take this off. So this is all spruce.
Yep.
You have the very top here.
Is
The front
layered
and the
in
tail
ivory.
is ivory. Now this is real ivory.
Yeah.
Yeah. Elephants went on strike in the 1960s, so from that point on, they're using plastics, which is probably a good thing. But many of these old pianos, if they were built then, they
Had actual ivory.
Had ivory.
Yep.
That was the standard back then. And it had actually ivory has a real grippy feel. So concert artists, if they can get their hands on ivory, they prefer that because as they're playing, it absorbs their sweat, especially if they're playing
Interesting.
Liszt or some Rachmaninoff
Yeah.
or something where they're sweating up a storm playing it. Plastic, it doesn't. So you could be slipping and sliding on the keys, So ivory has always been kind of the mainstay, but they stopped, at least in America, they stopped in the 1960s. They still build some in some of the European countries. They still have, if you had a stockpile of ivory, then you're allowed to. In Europe, I believe you're allowed to use those until you run out, kind of thing. Nobody's out. We're not supposed to be anyway. Poaching new elephants for it. As a matter of fact, the pendulum has kind of swung the other way, where they've got so many laws now. And I don't understand this logic, liberal logic. Forgive me, but
Go ahead.
a lot of auction companies, by law in some states, liberal states, they're required to take the ivories off before they sell the piano. If they have an old Steinway come in, and even if the ivories are just pristine and beautiful, their logic is that they don't want any ivory on anything. So they pop them off, they take them off, and then you have to go and put new plastics on there. It seems like it's the opposite. Like that is going to drive up demand, if anything. And it does do that, but you can't convince some of these ivory laws are just, they're horrible because
ridiculous.
And not just pianos, but a lot of times you'll have beautiful ivory on guns, the old shotguns and cue balls, old billiard tables.
Right. Yeah.
They're wanting to do away with all that, even though these elephants
what are you going to do?
died
Put it back?
120
Put it back
years
on
ago.
the elephant's
Well, you
skeleton?
can't. That's right. Yeah. Exactly. Right.
Exactly.
So there's really no logic behind it. It's a shame because and believe it or not, if you own a Steinway with original ivories, you're actually supposed to
Turn it
had
in.
them take them off. So this law, I think Obama signed it. Liberal, right? No, I don't remember.
I don't remember.
He signed this law, and it instantaneously made felons of half of the grandmas in the United States because they got an old piano that has ivory on it. And I don't understand.
Yeah.
But I digress. I don't know how I went off on
I
that.
don't know how we got there.
Ivory.
Yeah.
Ivory.
And they used ivory originally because of that stickiness, or
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's I guess to some degree it was a status symbol,
Yeah.
And they didn't have plastics back then. They
Yeah,
started
yeah,
coming
yeah.
out with plastics in the 1950s, and they started putting plastic in pianos as soon as the
Could.
technology could.
Right.
And the early plastics were really bad. They
Yeah, I can imagine.
broke and stuff. So I don't know if they really had a choice 100 years ago. They had to have something on the tops of the keys. It couldn't be wood. So I think ivory
Because
was.
of splinters or
Well, yeah, and they get dirty and
yeah.
when you're playing and stuff. So they've always just used ivory because it's a strong substance, it's a grippy substance. It can be cut and put on keyboards. So
Yeah. When we're talking about the wood that the action pins, or sorry, the tuning pins are strapped into,
yeah, they're pounded
right?
into a piece of wood called a pin block.
Pin block.
Mm-hmm.
How thick is the pin block and what's it made out of? Because
Yeah,
holding up 40,000 pounds of
yeah,
pressure is pretty crazy
yeah. So
for
they're
one
made
piece
out
of
of
wood.
hard rock maple, and they're
Okay.
plied. So the best pin blocks are there's usually 5 or 6 plies, maybe a quarter inch or so, and the pin blocks are inch and 3/4, inch and a half or so.
Okay.
Yeah,
So decently thick.
and then they're glued at 45-degree angles, so it gives even grip all the way around the pin.
Got it.
Yeah, and so when we replace pin blocks, there's supply companies, piano supply companies that you can get pin blocks from, and then we have to shape them to the back of the plate and all that. They got to make sure that they touch all the way across, or it won't hold a tune well. Like the pin block has to be shaped so it fits all the way along the back of what's called the plate flange, uh, in order for it to sit solidly, and then all the holes are drilled, and when you pound the pins in, then you have stability. Of course, you have screws that are screwed into the pin block as well. But so again, you hear Luke back there. I just shaped that pin block a couple days ago, and he's at NSA. So when he has time, usually on a Saturday, he'll come and he'll string. But I had to shape it. It took a whole day, drill all the pin holes, and now it's solid. So now he's pounding those pins in, and it'll hold tune for another 80 years, another 2 generations.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is what you see on the back of the piano. That wood is the pin board, correct?
Well, no, on the very back of the piano would be the beams that hold the structure of the entire piano in place. So the pin block is only 1.5 inches thick.
Yeah.
And so it's just on the other side of the plate.
Okay.
So if I
Got
took the
it.
plate out, you could see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the very back, you've got more maple, big giant beams holding the structure.
Yeah.
And that helps with the structure too. But the main thing that holds everything in tune is that pin block.
Yeah.
And that still kind of befuddles me after 30 years, the fact that there's literally 20 tons of tension just sitting there when a piano's in your living room in tune, just held, all that friction just holding like that.
Yeah. And the pins are metal. So how are they
Pins are
staying?
hardened steel.
Yeah, how are
hardened
they
steel.
staying in there?
Well, they're threaded. So there's real fine threads.
Aha.
Okay.
Got it. So it's like a screw.
Real fine threads. But it's all metal, and it's pounded in. So the tuning pin itself is about 2.5 inches, and then you'll wind the wire around it, and you'll pound it 1.5 inches in or so. So all that's left is the coil and the tip of the tuning pin where the tuner tunes it, right?
Yep.
But the rest of that tuning pin is real fine threads, and so they're literally just pounded in, and it's pressure and it's friction that holds them there.
Got it.
And then a tuner will come, put his tuning hammer on it, and he'll pull it up, and then those threads will grab, and they'll kind of hold, and that's how
and
it's
eventually
all
they'll
held
slip.
into place. Yeah.
And how are the strings still attached to the tuning pins?
So the top of the tuning pin has a hole. It's called a becket, where the string goes in, and then you wind it. So he'll put it in, he'll wind it 3 times, he'll pound one in a little bit, then he'll come around, bend it around the tuning, the hinge, a hitch pin there,
Yeah.
and then up and around, and then he'll wind it on another pin, pound that pin in, and then he'll pound them all the way in, and then he'll pull it up to pitch.
And
so there's
and
a little
3 circles around is enough to hold it.
3.5 windings is what you kind of
Really?
want. Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah.
And then you've also got, I noticed this may be difficult for people on camera to see, but it's the strings go up, and then there's kind of an adjuster that, and then they
so
and then
on
they
the
keep going up.
uprights, that's called a pressure bar, and so you
Yeah.
need You need what's called a termination point. So there's 2 or 3 termination points. You have a termination point on the bottom there and a termination point on the top, and the pressure bar pushes down so the string comes up, and when you tune it, it allows for those termination points, and then it allows for the string to vibrate at whatever frequency that you tune it up to.
Got it.
So generally speaking, A is kind of in the middle,
Yep.
and this is 440. And what that means, it's tuned to A440, so it's 440 hertz.
Yep.
Yeah. And so you have an A440, you have an A880. It's multiples. There's a lot of math there. And then as you're tuning, you just pull it up to it. Now the wire goes from about 13 gauge, American standard gauge wire, down to about 22 gauge. And there's a lot of math. It's an amazing thing. A lot of math involved. If you want it, let's say, so the top note is 13 gauge. Okay. And it gets thicker as it goes down.
Right.
If you wanted to string a piano with only 13 gauge wire, okay, and you want it to sound like a piano should sound, you would have to make the piano about 30 feet long. Okay. Nobody has room for a 30-foot piano, right?
Not many people do.
So what you have to do is you have to figure out ways to make it smaller and smaller and smaller. So every time you double the thickness of a string, you can shorten it by its half, right?
Makes sense.
And so that's why it goes from 13 down to about 21 gauge, and that's why the bass strings are wound thicker, and then down you get to this really low bass strings, and it's double wound. So you have the regular string, and then you have copper winding going down, and then you have another winding of copper. So the bass strings are, over a 1/4 inch thick. They're that thick because you have to make it small enough in order for it to fit into a piano.
Right.
So that's why the strings get thicker as they go down.
And adding width to the string, even if the original string is not that width, you add the copper rings later, deepens the note.
So that's part of what's called the scale design. So this piano, brand new, had, this is from the teens, so it's copper, but in the 1890s they used iron strings. So they would still, that again, part of the scale design. There is a thickness to each one of these that mathematically works for this,
resonates in that,
for this piano.
In that frequency.
So this is a new string, but it was made to factory specs.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the strings are made out of iron still?
No, they're made out of, so the bass strings would be wound with iron, but the strings themselves are made out of steel. And so by the 1870s, 1890s, they came out with what's called high tensile strength steel. So they were able to make a steel that was stronger. The steel is measured by tensile strength. So you have a regular tensile strength, it'll break at a certain amount of tension. They used to have World's Fairs. You've heard of those, right? Chicago World's Fair.
Yeah.
Well, back then, these companies would come and they would display all of their pianos, all of their scale designs, and they would have these booths set up to show exactly like how much tensile strength the steel has before it breaks. And people were interested in that kind of stuff back then. It was really neat. But they came out with what's called high tensile strength steel, meaning that it is the strongest steel that's made, basically. And that's how you can pull a string up to the pitch that it is. High C is a real high pitch. Still have a string that thick and it not break. Yeah. So strings, the steel strings here, we take off 5-pound coils of wire. So I buy them in big coils of wire, and they're cut for each individual piano. So Luke's over there cutting wire for this, a particular size. The bass strings, we take paper patterns. Remember I was talking about the termination points, right?
Yeah.
So there's a termination point here. There's a termination point down there, and where the bridge is. So you take a piece of paper and you put it across there and you sand all those. So you sand them in there.
The wire?
Holes. No. So so you take a paper template. So this is all part of the restoration process. So you take a piece of paper and you bring it across there, tighten it, and then you sand it so all of those the termination points make holes in the paper. And
Yep.
then you
Yep.
and then you sand down here. So what you're left with is a long piece of paper with a bunch of holes here, a bunch of holes here, and a bunch of holes here, right?
Right.
Then you take the first and the last of each section.
Yep.
Yeah. So this one is singles. These ones, there's 2 strings per note, right?
Yes.
So this is
Yeah,
one
yeah, I see
section,
that.
this is 2. You take those, I send them off to the Mapes Piano String Company in Elizabethton, Tennessee. They've been doing it since the 1880s, right? 5th, 6th generation.
Yeah.
That's what they do. Their factory is on One Wire Mill Road. So this big building is
The original.
the original,
Yeah.
right? That's the name of the street. And so I send the paper patterns and stuff to them, and they spin up the wire and they send it back. It's amazing.
Got
They've been
it.
doing
Yeah.
this for over
For
100
forever.
years. Yeah, it's wonderful. I love that.
No, that's fantastic.
Yeah. And so, so the bass strings are steel center, steel string.
Yep.
And then it's just copper wound, so that they're
Yeah.
wound all the way along there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why is it only this range? Because it feels like the strings could get shorter or longer. Why?
So it
the
has
range of
to
the
do
pianos.
with, if you'll see how the strings get longer, right?
Yep.
It has to do with the frequency that you're going for.
Yep.
This is a lower frequency.
Right.
That's a higher frequency.
Yep.
So lower frequencies are going to
Wiggle
go like
more.
this. Higher frequencies are going to be, right? That's
Yeah.
okay. So it has to do with the frequency. It has to do with you want to get the thickest string that you can with the high tensile strength steel, and the higher strings are shorter because they vibrate less.
Yeah.
And so that's why the speaking length, they call it. So when you hit the hammer, the part that vibrates is called it's the length that's speaking, right? That's the part of the string that's speaking. It's vibrating, it's making sound.
Right.
Yeah. So the speaking length on high C is just a little over an inch. And of course the speaking length on the lower strings, it depends on how the size of the piano, right? So there's some uprights that are taller. There's some uprights that are shorter. There's grand pianos. They're 5 feet, baby grands, all the way up to, 9 feet, 10
Yeah.
feet kind of thing. So once you figure out the size of the piano you want to build, then you employ mathematics to figure out the scale design. So the
Got it.
scale design has to do with what's the thickest piece of string I can use for each individual note, and where does that curve have to happen
Mhm.
in order for it to vibrate optimally.
Yeah, because it looks a little bit like an inverse harp.
Yeah.
In that it's kind of like a
Yeah. Right.
which is interesting.
Yeah. It's really
But
neat.
it feels like you could add like another string or 3 strings there.
You
and
could
go a
and
little-
make them higher than high C.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because generally speaking, most music is composed within that range.
And so that's why they stopped.
That's why they do it. Now,
Got it.
there's companies like Busendorfer in Austria and Fazioli in Italy who make pianos with a compass, it's called. How many notes the piano has is its compass. So for a long time, from let's say the 30s or 40s up to about the 1880s, they had what was called a 7-octave compass. So it went from A to A.
Yep.
7 octaves.
Yep.
Because most music was written
In
that
those 7
range.
octaves,
Beethoven, everything Beethoven wrote. As a matter of fact, you hear some of Beethoven's sonatas, like his Pathétique sonata, the third movement in the rondo. He'll go all the way up, and you can tell that he ran out of keyboard because he has to go up and do a couple of frills and come back down. But you could hear that he wanted to go higher.
Right.
Beethoven always wrote to the very bottom and the very top of
Yeah.
the keyboard. It was an amazing thing. He had that mind, But there's some modern composers, 20th century, that write where they want some of the lower notes. So Busendorfer and other brands accommodate that. They make like Busendorfer's Imperial Grand, big 9'6" monster,
Huge piano.
huge piano.
Yeah.
It has 92 notes, I think. This is 88.
Good golly. Yeah.
Yeah. So they have another 8 notes on the bottom, but it goes so low. You hit that lowest note and you can hear it. Whoa, 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 whoa. It's not even like, it's too low to be pleasing to the ear anymore,
Yeah.
really.
Okay.
But a modern piano is called, it's a 7 1/3 octave compass.
Got
So
it.
so you have A to A, and then you have the top three notes because people just like ending on C. So usually
Yeah.
a modern piano, the last note is C because they play up and they hit that C at the end.
Yep. Got it.
Yeah.
And then there's also these little I don't know if people on camera will be able to see it again, but it looks like an old-fashioned grenade was just a miniature old-fashioned grenade was just stuck in the end of these keys
Oh,
here.
you mean this thing here?
Yeah. What is this
Oh,
thing?
okay. So that's called a capstan, and a capstan on an upright, the action sits back here, right?
Yep.
And so the capstan is the thing that comes in contact with the rest of the action. So it pushes everything
Aha.
up. Yeah. And when you get the action completely built in here, there's like 32 adjustments for each note. The capstan's one of them. Yeah. So you'll see in
Wow.
this capstan here, there's little holes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's threaded.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you turn it, it threads up, it threads down. That's just one of the 32 adjustments that you have to do.
What are those other adjustments?
There's just a lot. Regulating a piano is taking each one of the 9,000 parts and adjusting them to each other so they work optimally with each other.
Got it. Yep.
So, for instance, I don't want to get too deeply in the weeds, but the capstans affect what's called lost motion. So when you have the action in, yeah, on an upright piano, all of the shanks rest on a rail called a rest rail. Okay?
Got it.
And the little jack that pushes everything up, it has to be just below so it clicks back. So there has to be a little of what's called lost motion. So when you touch a note on an upright, if it's regulated correctly, there's going to be a little bit of a wink. There's going to be just it's motion, but it's lost motion because there's nothing going on. It's just a little, right? Because if it's too high, that little jack will hit and it won't come all the way back underneath for the next rotation, right?
Got it.
But if it's too low, then you can push down on the key and you have too much lost motion. And that loses power when you play.
Yeah.
So the capstan is designed to you crank it up until you're cranking on the capstan, you're feeling this, and then when it just barely winks and you know that the jack can slip back underneath the whole assembly, that's one adjustment. That's the capstan adjustment.
Got it.
And there's a saying in the piano business that everything you do, now it'll take a good half hour or an hour just to regulate the capstans.
Yeah.
And they say that every time you do one here, you're 1% closer because it just, it takes forever to regulate a piano correctly.
Yeah. So there's different kinds of pianos. Are they used for different kinds of things?
Yeah, sure. So the you essentially have a vertical piano and a horizontal piano.
Right.
Okay. So the vertical pianos, the upright pianos, are designed more where space is at a premium in the home. You don't have room.
New York City.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. There you go. You put it against the wall and it serves its purpose. Also, on both a grand and an upright piano, the bigger it is, with an upright, the taller it is, the fuller the sound is going to be. With a grand piano, the longer it is, the bigger the sound's going to be because the strings are longer.
Right.
Right.
Like the idea of a larger speaker.
Yeah, exactly right.
Got it.
Exactly. Yeah, you're gonna hear a fuller sound out of a 15-inch woofer than you do a 12-inch and all that kind of stuff because it's just a little bit bigger,
right?
Beefier, a little bassier sounding, right? Well, with upright pianos, you can go, generally speaking, as high as you want because the ceiling's way up there, and so you can have any size vertical piano.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about a grand piano, especially with homes being smaller now than they were 100 years ago, right? 5 foot, and you get into 6, 7, then you're
10 feet, yeah.
Well, then you're getting into like taking up the whole living room, and then you're deciding whether you need to get rid of the dining room table at that point, right? So with vertical pianos, therefore, again, where space is at a premium in the home. But there's a huge difference with the action. Okay. So on an upright piano, no matter what it is, whether it's a small little spinet or a real tall $80,000 Bösendorfer, right? It's still a vertical action. So you have the key that goes in and the capstan, right, pushes everything up.
Yep.
So you have this kind of indirect thing. So when you're playing, you're pushing down, but you're actually sending everything up,
Like a
and the
lever.
hammer is hitting this way,
Got
and
it.
springs are pushing it back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of an indirect feel. So no matter what vertical piano you have, you're not going to be able to sit down and play a lot of the Chopin etudes or lists,
Right.
stuff, because it doesn't have the repetition that you need to play something really, really fast, right?
Got it.
A grand piano is different. So when you have a grand action, when you push the key down, okay, you push the hammer up. The hammer hits the string and gravity pulls it back down, right?
Yeah.
And so you have far more response in a grand
You
piano.
can play faster.
You play faster.
Yeah.
You can play with more nuance. Even if you're playing
Softer notes,
and
yeah.
light, pianissimo, it's going to feel better. It's going to feel different. And that's why you don't see vertical pianos on the concert stages and stuff, because, if you're a concert piano player, yeah,
The nuances matter.
the nuances matter, whether you're playing piano or forte, loud, soft, whatever dynamic you have. You're allowed to dig into the action of a grand piano, kind of lose yourself a little more, because music's an emotional thing, right? You know that. And so you close your eyes and you start playing on a grand piano, a well-regulated grand piano. You can get lost. You can just kind of sink in, and it's almost like you kind of become one with the, concert players
One with the piano, yeah.
do that. With a vertical piano, you're always aware that you're playing an instrument. It's a good mechanic.
It can be a
machine.
great instrument.
It's a great instrument.
Yeah.
And you can play the piano, and if you're doing hymns and have a bunch of people over, you play it, everything's wonderful. But it doesn't give you the nuance that a grand piano does.
Yeah.
And so when people come into the store, it's like they have a budget and they're like, okay, so should I get a big, tall, upright piano that's going to sound huge, or do I get a 5-foot baby grand piano? And my answer is, it depends on your level of proficiency. If you're just starting out, or if your kids are just starting out, a vertical piano will be totally fine for the first 5, 6, 7 years of their study.
Yeah.
But if they're going to aspire to concertize or get really, really good at a piano, then you're going to need, the teacher's going to tell you that you're going to need a grand piano. It doesn't have to be a 9-foot. It can be a 5-foot, but it's got to be that grand action.
Yeah.
Yeah. So everybody's different. Everybody's priorities are different. Everybody's needs are different. It just depends on
what you need.
what the family's, what your goal is. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
This may be a stupid question. What's the difference between a piano and an organ?
So an organ has to do with wind coming in and producing sound. Okay. Whether you pump it or whether it's electric, right?
Yep.
But there's one. Well, if it's electric, you have a volume control. But usually, an organ is like a harpsichord. When you push down, the little quill comes up and plucks the string on a harpsichord.
Mm-hmm.
A little porcupine quill that plucks the string. If you hit it softly, or if you slam it down with a hammer, it's just going to pluck it at the same volume.
Right.
So with a harpsichord, and I'm just using that as an example, because an organ kind of works the same way. You basically have one volume. And so originally they had the harpsichord, a lot of Bach and stuff was written on the harpsichord. Beethoven came along and others in the early Romantic period, and they wanted a piano that not only could they play soft piano, but they wanted to play it loud, forte.
Right.
They wanted piano forte. They wanted all of the dynamics. So Cristofori, Italian guy in the early 1700s, I think, came up with this instrument that the harder you hit it, the louder it was, right? And it was amazing. And it's, you know what a piano, do you know what category a piano is and what kind of instrument a piano is?
It's strings, but I don't know.
It's a drum.
Really?
A piano is a percussion instrument.
Well, that makes sense.
Because it hits the string, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
It's like, so the piano is my favorite drum. because it is what it is. It's not a string instrument. You don't play with a bow,
Right.
right? And you don't play with your fingers. I mean, on the strings,
Yeah.
right? It's percussive.
You hit
That's
a
your
key.
factoid
There you go.
for the day.
You hit your key, and then the soundboard
Yeah.
vibrates somewhat like a drum.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, but the it's percussive. The definition of a drum is you hit it,
Yeah.
right? Well, with a piano, the hammer's hitting the string.
Right.
That's the essence of what a piano is.
Yeah.
It's percussive.
Yeah. Has piano technology changed in the past hundreds of years?
Yeah. Believe it or not, it hasn't changed hardly at all in the last 140 years.
Okay.
Okay. So up until that point, remember I'm talking about all the world's fairs and people would come and show their latest, greatest. The technology was getting better and better and better. Being able to cast iron plates to hold the tension of all these strings, and all, there's so many different things, but it peaked around the 1890s or so. So
Okay.
by the 1890s, they had the modern grand piano. What's gotten better since then is not the scale designs and not the quality of the piano itself, but the quality control of how many you can build. Okay, so Steinway builds 4,000, 5,000 pianos a year,
Mm-hmm.
and they've been very consistent from the 1870s all the way up through. They're serial numbered now, I think, in I don't know if they've hit 600,000 yet, but in the high 500,000s
Of all time.
Yeah, you go to a Steinway dealership and you'll look at the serial number, 590,000. It's the 590,000th whatever Steinway built. Yeah. Yamaha can build 40 pianos a day. Yeah. Because of their production line approach, right?
Yeah.
So that's gotten better. Quality control, being able to be consistent. If you sit down at a Yamaha C3, like a 6-foot Yamaha, in Moscow, Idaho, or Pig Knuckle, Arkansas, they're going to sound the same,
Right.
because the quality control is there.
It's perfect. Yeah.
Is the way it is. Steinway and other hand-built pianos can't build 40 pianos a day without something going wrong. Some of those pianos built
Yeah.
on a Friday are not going to be the same as the ones
Built on
bright and early
Tuesday.
on a Tuesday, right?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So that has been better, but the quality of the pianos, I don't want to say nothing. I mean, there's some techs out there who can kind of redesign some of the keyboards and some of the nuances, and
Yeah.
I'll give them that. But generally speaking, I'm of the opinion that a 100-year-old, 120-year-old Steinway, fully restored, like done right,
Mm-hmm.
full Renner action, German action, I mean, just everything nicely well done, is a better piano than a brand new Steinway. Now, they still build Steinway Bs, okay? And they're awesome. They're $120,000. They're great pianos. I think that piano, if you buy one new, 120 years from now, if it's restored, it'll sound better than
Than it does right now.
Yeah, because the inherent properties of the Sitka spruce and stuff, it just gets better with age.
Yeah.
Like a Stradivarius, you've heard of Stradivarius
Right, yeah.
violins. They're built in the 1700s, right?
Yeah.
And it's got the original top. That top is spruce,
Yeah.
right? And you put a blindfold on and you play a Stradivarius and you play a brand new any violin, you're going to hear a difference. It's like,
Right.
wow, that is fuller and sweeter sounding and just wonderful.
Like a baseball glove.
Yeah, I
You
think
want
so.
that age and
Exactly
authenticity.
right. It fits and all that
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
and
yeah.
Right. Well, that's the same thing with piano. So now again, you go to a Steinway dealer and they're going to tell you
They're going to be
the
like, this is
opposite.
the best.
Yeah, you don't want that old
ever.
100-year-old junk.
Yeah.
You want a new one. Okay, but I've built so many of these Steinways, and that what they call the golden era of Steinway making, or piano making. So let's just roughly say 1900 to about 1930, right?
Okay.
Right before the stock market, right before the Depression,
Yeah.
and then you had the World Wars and all that kind of stuff, the Second World War. But that golden era is kind of the sweet spot. If you find a piano in the 1920s, especially those roaring 20s, they were built just incredible pianos. and you fully restore it correctly, in my opinion, you've got a better piano, and you got it for less than half the price of a new one. It's
Yeah.
amazing. It sounds too good to be true. It's like it can't be. There's got to be something. But the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of people with just so much money out there that they're happy to spend, because the perception is new is better. Okay.
Right.
There's two things. Newer is better is one perception, and that's true in a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
If you buy a new car, you're going to have a safer car. It's going to have airbags. It's going to have better brakes. It's going to have
Right.
all kinds of better things than the car built 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Computers, right? You buy a
Same
new
thing.
computer. It's got more memory. It's got all the
Yeah.
latest stuff than even a computer built a year ago, right? So you have a lot of examples to bolster that myth, I would call it, because in the piano industry, it's almost exactly the opposite. Like, they peaked way back when the public was discerning and they knew that what they wanted. Everybody played the piano. They were building pianos fundamentally for different reasons back then.
For people who wanted to play pianos.
People who knew how to play piano.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Building them for different reasons then than they're building them for now.
Right.
Yeah. 90% of pianos, you go to a dealer and you see glossy black, all these rows and rows of glossy black pianos. Vast majority of those pianos are built offshores, mainly China, Indonesia, well, Steinway even. And I'm not trying to cast aspersions on Steinway. We restore them all the time, but they had to do what everybody had to do. They have their Steinways. And then their step down from there are their Boston pianos. Boston pianos are made by Kawai, which is a Japanese company. Yeah. They'll say they're better because something Steinway, but that's their piano, but Kawai builds them for them. You step down from there and they have their Essex piano. So if you go to Spokane Steinway, you're going to have Steinway, Boston, Essex. The Essex pianos are built in China. Okay. They're Chinese made pianos. And that is indicative of just people's priorities. You have a family that walks in, I want a Steinway. There's a Steinway, it's $100,000. What else do you have? Because they can, and they just have to keep going down. Because they're building them for different reasons now.
So why should people have pianos?
Why should they have pianos?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's universally known that music enhances life. In particular, pianos, there's been all kinds of studies that show that kids that have taken piano lessons in their childhood are valedictorians, salutatorians. They have poise, they have discipline. There's just so many. There's obviously general music appreciation, right?
Yeah.
But if you have the dexterity, if you practice and stick with it, maybe a little longer than you did, I don't know. But if you stick with
much longer than I did,
then you're going. It helps brain function. It helps dexterity. It helps what's in your mind to come out your fingers, kind of thing. So a piano has been part of high society for 150 years, not just because pianos look amazing in the home, but because when you practice and you learn and you concertize, you get to that level, you have worked your brain, you've worked your muscles, you've gotten that dexterity down where you're sharper in life. There's multitudinous reasons to have a piano.
Yeah, and
Especially
often
me.
the yes, yeah, especially from Grand American Piano.
That's exactly right.
But often the people who are the most successful and wealthy have a deep appreciation for not only musical instruments but also classical music.
Correct.
Which
culture.
Yes.
Yeah, more refined culture. Sure.
And that comes out in the way that they live and act and such.
Yeah, I would say that a piano is kind of not the mother of all instruments, but if you learn piano, you can transition to another instrument fairly easily.
Right.
I think, and I don't quote me on this, but I think that a concert piano player could learn violin where it would be a little more difficult for a classical violinist to sit down and learn pianos quickly, because on piano you're applying both of your hands, your brain's always working. You have two different things. What do you call it? Multi-dexterous, right?
Multi-dexterity, yeah.
Dexterity. Your feet are coming down here with the
Yeah.
pedals, all that kind of stuff. Beethoven composed on a piano. I mean, his symphonies and stuff. It's not like he took a violin and listened to it and said, I like that on the violin. And then you took a cello and did this.
Right.
Like he sat at a keyboard and he would play and he would compose that way, because the keyboard, the way that the compass of a keyboard, a piano is lined up, it's basically every instrument in the orchestra. If you need to compose something for a bass, then
You got the
have your
bass keys.
If you have to compose something on a piccolo, then you go up here.
Yep.
And then everything in between.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of reasons.
And talking about the pedals, what do they do? What are they?
Oh.
Because I feel like when I played the piano, which is I did a bad job of that as a child, but I would always practice around with the pedals.
Yeah.
And one of the pedals made the notes last longer,
Yeah.
and the other two I never really noticed do anything.
Yeah. Well, so the main pedal on both an upright and a grand is called the sustain pedal. So when you play a note, okay, the hammer hits the strings, but there's also something called a damper, and the damper has to lift.
Stops. Yeah.
It lifts from the strings to play the note. And then when you take your finger off the key, the damper comes back and stops the note. Yeah.
Yep.
The sustain pedal is set up where it lifts all the dampers away from the strings. So you push the pedal down, and then any of the notes that you play just rings out.
Right.
Right. And so that's the most used pedal is the sustain pedal. It's the one on the right. That's the one that always wears out. I've got pianos where there's like literally holes in the pedal because that's the pedal that everybody uses.
Yeah.
You know?
And
now,
it's a similar effect to like press and hold the key.
Yes.
Got it.
But here's the thing though. If you just press and hold one key, you have that one note going. But if you lift the dampers and you play, not only do you have the fundamental tone remember the speaking length, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you also have, some pianos are designed with what's called duplex scaling, where it allows for the overtones to ring out. So the thirds and the fifths and stuff. So you'll hear the fundamental tone, but you'll also hear the fifth of that tone ring out. And when you push the dampers down and you play a note, that's why it sounds so full, because not only are you employing the fundamental tones, but you have a lot of in the higher end pianos, you have the duplex scaling work, and so it really fills out the room.
Yeah.
So the sustain pedal is the most used pedal.
Yep.
And generally speaking, that's the right pedal. Generally speaking, on the left, it's what's called the soft pedal. Okay. And on an upright piano, it literally just pushes the hammers closer to the strings.
Oh, really?
So when you play, it's softer.
Got it.
So on a grand piano, because concert players need more nuance, right?
Yeah.
When they play, it shifts the keyboard. You ever notice that? You push that pedal down and the whole keyboard shifts. Well, what happens is when it's in position and the hammers are coming up it's hitting three strings.
Mm-hmm.
But when you put that shift pedal in, it moves over and it only hits two of the strings, right?
Got it.
So it's softer, but it's still the same exact feel.
Right.
Right. On an upright piano, when you push the hammers forward, you have a lot of lost motion. Remember we were talking about lost motion? So it's going to have a different feel to it, but it's softer. The middle pedal, it's different on each piano. Usually on upright pianos, it's what they call an apartment pedal. So there's this thing with felt that when you push the pedal down, it comes down over the hammers. And so the hammers hit that felt before it hits the string, and it just softens everything up. So you can like play late at night. You're not going to wake your neighbor up kind of thing. So that's generally what the middle pedal does on a vertical piano.
Got it. Because there's already felt on the hammers.
There's
on
felt
the ends of the hammers.
Yes, but
it's like a cloth.
It's a kind of a cloth thing that comes by. So when it hits that, you can still hear the note, but it mitigates the sound. It just softens the sound really bad. On a grand piano, if it's a high-end grand, it's called a sostenuto. It's a really intricate system where when you play notes and then you push this, try this when you go home, okay? You play the notes, you push the pedal down, and then only those notes that you had held down sustain. Everything else doesn't.
Got it.
So there's a little tab that comes up, and it holds just when you play a chord, those dampers come up, and this little tab grabs just those dampers and sustains them, and the
Okay.
rest of them aren't.
So
there's
it's like the right pedal, but like specialized.
specialized, correct?
Got
Right.
it. Okay.
And there's some music that was written just for the sostenuto pedal kind of thing. It's kind of a weird thing, but most people use it about as much as you've used it. I mean, it's mostly the sustain pedal.
Yeah.
And then the soft pedal if you need to,
And for that apartment pedal effect,
yeah,
how does it get the cloth back up?
a spring will pull it up.
Okay.
Yeah. So you got a whole rail that goes across with a spring, and then when you push it down and you let go, the spring pulls pulls the cloth back up.
I've also noticed with pianos and other instruments that, like, if I were to move it from here to my parents' house, that the tone would change.
A little bit. Yeah.
And it's what's happening there?
Well, I mean, it's again, when a piano's in tune, it's under all this tension, right?
Yeah.
So whenever we deliver a piano, especially if the piano has new strings, because the strings are stretching, the move will put it out of tune just a little bit. But what puts it out of tune for the most part, and I think that's what you're talking about when you're saying the tone changes. It just goes out of tune a little bit. It sounds a little bit different.
Okay.
Because it's acclimating to a different climate.
Okay.
So you get that a lot if you move from like region to region. Like if I'm in the Midwest where it's dry in the winters and stuff, bring it out here or bring it to Seattle or something, you're going to get, there's a lot of moisture in the air, and that soundboard will take the moisture, it'll swell up, and it'll, because when a piano's in tune, all those strings are pushing on the bridge on the soundboard. So if the soundboard expands or contracts, what that's going to do is it's going to put everything out of tune just a little bit. So whenever a piano's moved, it usually takes 30 days or so to acclimate to the climate in the new home.
Okay.
And then you just have a tuner come out and retune it.
Yeah. And would it be possible to change out the spruce for like an oak? Or is the soundboard pretty much always spruce?
You could put an oak soundboard, but oak is very rigid, so it's not going to vibrate.
So you want a softer wood for that.
You want a softer, lighter wood, and one that.
Got it.
And also, not to get too technical, but these soundboards and these vintage pianos were taken again off these big first generation trees that have grown for hundreds of years. Optimally, you kind of want a Sitka spruce board that has maybe 12 or 14 grains per inch, and they're nice and straight going all the way down. If you take a third or fourth generation spruce tree, well, have you ever seen pictures of like a 2x4 from 1912 and a 2x4 in a modern build?
No.
It's an amazing thing. It's like there's big giant spaces, and the grain lines are kind of all over the place, and they're kind of squiggly and stuff. That sound has to travel through there.
Right.
And that's another reason why you're going to just get better sound out of an old growth soundboard, because the grain is usually nice and straight. You have that nice compact 12 or 14 grains per inch kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you put oak in as opposed to spruce, it's probably going to be real tinny, bright sounding, and it's not going to vibrate. It's not going to have a big full sound.
So is the ideal conditions for a soundboard and a piano perfectly dry or perfectly wet?
Generally,
what's the situation?
They generally dry them out to about 6 to 8% humidity or something.
Okay.
They have kilns that they use, or they just let them air dry kind of thing over a period of time, and that's it. And the soundboard will take on some humidity. You go to Seattle, it'll lose some humidity if it's in a home in Michigan in the wintertime, because it's drier.
Yeah.
There are things that you can add to like humidifiers, dehumidifiers, that kind of stuff, that can kind of regulate the intake, the expansion or the contraction of the humidity in the wood, and those help.
Yeah.
Those help sometimes. Yeah.
for a normal person who's looking to go buy a piano,
Mm.
what should they be looking for?
Well, I think the first thing is budget. Everybody's got a budget,
Yep.
right? You have to have a budget. And that's why um, if you go to any piano store that sells primarily new pianos, a dealer, piano dealer, everybody has their own version of a good, better, best.
Mhm.
Okay? So you walk into the showroom and the salesman is going to start asking questions like, what's your budget? What have you seen? What do you like? And when he can figure out, well, I only want to spend 6,000. I want to spend 10,000. Oh, I could spend 20,000. He gets a budget, then he's going to bring you to a piano in that budget. But generally speaking, the good pianos, I say that optimistically, are pianos built Chinese, Indonesian type pianos. It's a strange thing. I got to back up just for a minute. So in the history of the 20th century in America, right? It was the American pianos, Steinways, Mason and Hamlin, Baldwin, Kanabe, Chickering, all these great old brands until about the late 50s and 60s, where homes got smaller. People were buying less pianos because they were watching TV or whatever, right? So the manufacturers had to do something. And so they started importing pianos from Japan. The two main ones were Yamaha and Kawai. So
Right.
in the late 60s and 70s, if you went into a piano store, you would find a lot of American pianos and some Japanese pianos that were less money because they could build them for less money.
Right.
But they're still consistent pianos. They were still decent pianos. So it was where the Japanese pianos were the entry-level pianos. But then the Korean companies saw that, and they started importing pianos in the 1980s that were less money than the Japanese pianos.
Yeah.
So then you had Korean as good piano, Japanese as better,
American is best.
and European as best, like the Busendorfer and those pianos I was talking about. European pianos, German pianos, Austrian, stuff like that. So that was like in the 80s and 90s. Then they started bringing pianos in from China. It's like anything else. Like, you're going to, whether you buy clothes or whether you buy cars or whatever, the Hyundais, Korean, cheaper. Honda Accord, Toyota Tercel, Japanese, a little bit better. And arguably luxury American, right? Continental, Lincoln, or Cadillac, or the BMW, Mercedes, that kind of stuff. That's the good, better, best, right?
Right.
It's just that in car dealerships, you go to one car dealership. They don't have good, better, best.
Yeah.
But a piano dealer will have all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So then the Chinese pianos started to flood the market in the 2000s, and then Indonesian pianos. I don't know where they're going to make them next.
Thailand.
Ukraine or Thailand, or I don't know what, but it's coming. And the cheaper you get, the less the wood is seasoned, the worse it sounds, right? So what I try to do, and so here we go. I mean,
Go for it.
What I'm a piano rebuilder. So I take these old American pianos, fully restore them to as new condition. Those are my best. And I would put those up next to any new piano. Those are my best. And then I look around and I try to find good old Japanese pianos and Korean pianos. Okay. I stay away from the Chinese pianos. I stay away from the Indonesian pianos, which is the majority of pianos you're going to find new. It's weird, man. You go to these places and everything is either digital pianos because people's budgets are, I want to spend $2,000, and you can't build a piano and sell it and make even $1 for $2,000, right? You just can't. You can't make them any cheaper than they're making them now. So what I try to do is I have restored pianos, and then I have pre-owned pianos. I've used pianos, but I find them from like Yamaha, Kawai, and Youngchang, Samick, some of the Korean made. I don't do Chinese. I don't do Indonesian because the quality. You have to stop somewhere, man. With the quality control, you have to have at least this much, right? So that's what I have now. And also I have to hasten to add that when you hear restored piano, most people, when they hear restored, they think, oh, used. It's not new. It must be used. And there's a sense in which, 100-year-old piano is a used piano. but it's not a used piano. It's far closer to a new piano
Because you've restored.
because it's a new
Yeah.
piano.
Right.
Right. And so that's one of the biggest things that people's perceptions are when they call me, what new pianos do you have? Not a one. Not a one. Not new Steinways, because I'm not going to be able to find $100,000 customers, right? And not new Chinese pianos, because they're junk at any price. I just don't. I don't want to deal with it, and you don't want to deal with it, right?
Right.
So my specialty is either taking somebody's grandma's piano and fully restoring it to new condition, or having these old Mason and Hamlin's, Steinways and stuff, and other brands. I mean, it's not just Steinway. There's dozens and dozens of great old American companies, but that's kind of my specialty: hand-built American pianos. And rarely do my pianos exceed $25,000, and I know it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
But $25,000 isn't even going to buy you a 6-foot Yamaha today. It's not. Pianos are in the astronomical numbers. A new Steinway S, a little 5'1" baby grand, it's $70,000. That's where they start, So I've got great restored, partially restored, fully restored. I try to find a piano to kind of fit in everybody's budget. My sweet spot is, let's say, generally speaking, $8,000 to $12,000 or $14,000 for a piano that maybe had come in and had been restrung before or had new action put in. I come in, I either refinish it, or I go through and I restring it, or do something where it's a good solid instrument. It sounds great.
Right.
And it's about the same price as a brand new Chinese grand piano. The least expensive,
but much better.
Oh, far superior, with the lumber
Yeah.
core wood and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And some of them have, like, this is Mission style. You're not going to find a new piano like that. It's really beautiful. I don't have the front panel on it, but there's some Louis French carved pianos. Your guys that's a late Georgian style.
Yeah.
George III style, man. Big pillars coming down, beautiful carving on the music rack.
It's gorgeous. Yeah.
You can't find that. You can get Busendorfer builds those for $250,000 and stuff. You can find them, but you're not really going to find that kind of stuff in a new piano.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I specialize
So for someone out there who's got a piano, how do they know if it needs to be retuned or restored, or what's the situation?
If the piano is tall like this or taller, that's generally a sign on an upright that it's 100 to 120 years old.
Okay.
If there's carving on it, beautiful carving, that's a sign that it's
older.
Yep. And most of the grand pianos, baby grands that people get from their grandmother or great aunt they never knew, and all of a sudden the piano shows up. It's like, there's a pretty good chance it's going to be at least 80 or 100 years old. If it's around a century old, it needs, at the very least, strings. You remember we talked about why it needs strings. You put new tuning pins, new strings, and it brings back the tuning integrity. Then the pin's tight, it can be tuned again, that kind of thing. So, and they can always call me or email or text or whatever.
Yeah.
I have books that if you give me a serial number, I can tell you how old the piano is, and whether it's, and I'll be honest if it's worth restoring or not, but
Right.
even then, pianos in general are more expensive than people think they are. It's a little frustrating. In our little church community, I'll have people call me and say, "Hey, I'm getting this piano for free. Can you help me move it?" And I'm like, "Okay, I'm happy to help you move it." They don't realize that it's going to be moved into their house. The tuner's going to come, and he's going to try to tune it, and it's just going to slip right back down. I'm sorry, but you can't tune it. So, getting a free piano is like getting a free horse. It's not
still
free.
have to care for it.
It's not free.
Yeah,
right.
you're being lied
so
to.
you have to be, and it's not necessarily that the person is trying to deceive them or anything. It's just that it's an old piano. People don't realize, they need to be restrung, kind of thing.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
there it is.
What's the worst condition you've seen a piano in?
I've seen some that have been in floods in the basement and stuff, or something fell down and through, and whatever. I had a couple people call me after what was it? Hurricane. What was the big hurricane?
Katrina?
Yeah, Katrina.
Yeah.
They called me and they says, "Can you restore my piano?" And I'm like, "Well, how bad is it?" "Well, it's still sitting in, 5 feet of water right now. It's like right now underwater." I'm like, "No, can't do it." But other than that, you can generally restore a
Pretty much
piano.
anything.
Yeah, as long as it hasn't been just waterlogged, soaked kind of thing.
Yeah.
You can fix veneer, you can go through, put new pin blocks in, you can put new action parts in,
Yeah.
And generally speaking, those older pianos are they're a diamond in the rough. They're well worth
They're lovely.
preserving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You mentioned before that you wanted to be a rock star
Yeah.
in the beginning of your years.
Yeah.
Where'd that story go?
Well, I mean, that was before I was a Christian even, but everybody thinks along those lines.
At some point,
dreaming.
yes.
But I started playing guitar at a fairly early age. So I was 13, 14, just out of boredom, and really nothing to do. I come from a very small little Indian town in northern Michigan, about 12 miles from the big Mackinac Bridge up there, and there's just not a lot to do. It's beautiful, beautiful area. But when you're a kid, it's like there's nothing to do. So I took up guitar, but I also took up everything that goes along with that kind of lifestyle too. I'm a Christian. I got saved later in life, right? As a matter of fact, I got saved when I was 27. New Year's Eve, 1997. I ended up in the hospital. I was just very heavily into drugs and all that kind of stuff, and I basically I kind of cried out to God, and I got saved Christmas Day, right? I was 27 years old. I'm 54 now. So this Christmas coming up, a couple months, I will officially have been a Christian longer than I've been a pagan in my life.
There you go.
Isn't that crazy?
Congratulations.
Yeah. Well, I had very little to do with it,
Yep.
But so growing up there, and then of course I wanted to play, and I was a pretty good player. But I went out there. When you go to a big college and stuff, you got Europeans and Asians that come out, and they're monsters on the guitar. They're just really awesome. So I got put in my place real quickly, and then I got saved, and I put it down for a long time, and I picked it back up. I was talking to our pastor, and he's like, if you're saved, then you got the Holy Spirit in you, and you need to change your strings and get playing again, right? You're doing it for the Lord. And I've been doing that and been playing local stuff. The Dad's Band, you're probably familiar with that over the many years. You've seen a couple of those shows, and that's been a lot of fun. Your little brother was in it. That was fun. He played the awesome Logos song.
Yeah.
We have that somewhere. There's a whole Logos. It's called the Dad's Band page on YouTube. And we've done over 130 songs now through the years. Doug's been involved in quite a few of them. He has a lot of fun doing that.
I'm sure he does. Yeah.
Because it's just a situation where he doesn't have to be on as a pastor. He's
a pastor.
He's a pastor, right? Yeah. But when he comes and kicks his shoes off and comes to rehearsal, it's like, okay, he just kind of figuratively lets his hair down, and we just have a lot of fun doing it. It's been fun. So I still play, and I enjoy it a lot. But I might argue that I'm doing it for bigger and more grandiose reasons than I thought I was when I was going to take over the world back then. Now it's for the kingdom. And so I feel fortunate that I still can play.
For someone who was in your situation, what would you say to them if you could speak to your 27-year-old self?
Well, it's a strange thing with me because I wasn't argued into the kingdom. This is going to sound strange. I was a Calvinist before I even knew what that meant, because I was running away from God, right? I kind of knew everybody knows he exists, right? Everybody knows that.
Yeah.
And I knew that, but I just didn't want to deal with it because I love my sin, right? That's why people do it. It's like you're never going to win in our apologetics are more for believers than convincing somebody. They say that. For me, it's like the longest journey I took was the 18 inches from my head to my heart kind of thing, because I always knew about God and stuff. But he found me, he grabbed me, he put me in a situation like that. But I would say just stop running. If I could talk to myself, back then. I would say stop running and redeem the time. That because the locust ate many, many years of my youth, you know, and I relish and love the Lord and just thrilled that He saved me when He saved me, and He, drew straight with my crooked lines kind of thing. But the one thing that I would say is just stop running, loving God, and understanding that your sin is forgiven and that things have been made right with me and the creator of the universe, far exceeds anything that I was chasing before, right? It's just that reality, the reality of the fact that there is that when Christ bridged that gap between my utter sinfulness and God's utter holiness, that is a bigger high than I've ever experienced in my life, right?
Yeah.
So I'd just tell myself to stop running, but I don't think my old self would listen.
Yeah.
I think you probably run faster.
Had to go through that.
But I had people praying for me and stuff, and
Yeah.
But all of that, God's control and sovereign, and because of that, not glorifying that by any means, any way, I wouldn't have taken the path that I took and met my wife and had the kids and came up here for Logos and NSA and all that kind of stuff. I just wouldn't have done that, So God knew through it all. And so I'm to the point now where I thank Him for my misery back then too,
Yeah.
because it was utter misery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always like to ask people, what's your best piece of advice you would give to anyone watching? Is that your best piece of advice? Stop running?
Yeah, if they were like me, I would say stop running. The other piece of advice is I would just say to think about your situation, in that you either have, if you're not a Christian, you either have too high view of yourself or too low view of God. You need to read the Bible, the first 3 chapters of Genesis, even about what an accurate anthropology it puts forth, right? We are not basically good. Okay. Something happened, Genesis 3, that made us basically evil. We all came from that. And we are in our current state, we are alienated from God. It's impossible for us to even come to God because we have zero desire to come to Him. Zero desire. God has to put that in there, and you have to be open to that, because you don't want to find yourself at the end of your life, and that can happen at any point in life, man. I just lost a dear friend, in the day before he died, he would have never have thought, I'm going to die. You can die, and people do all the time. But just take inventory. Be honest with yourself. Be honest with yourself. You know that there is this gap and this animosity between you and whoever, even if you haven't read the Bible, even the creator of the universe. You know that there's something utterly otherworldly about Him, holy about Him. And then read the Bible and see exactly what it says about God, how it describes how holy, how perfect, how He can't see sin, how He can't look upon sin, and just get a correct understanding of who God is and who you are. And that should be enough for you to fall on your face and ask, what must I do to be saved? How can I bridge that gap? How can I bridge it? Stop deceiving yourself. That would be my advice.
Yeah. Where can people find you and Grand American Piano and the rest of that online?
Yeah. Well, so grandamericanpiano.com is the website. You can email me, clint@grandamericanpiano.com, if you have any questions about that. I love educating people on pianos. I really do.
This is fantastic.
Because it can be very intimidating. Okay. The worst you can do
12,000 pieces is a lot.
Well, the worst you can do is load your family into your car and drive up to a dealership not having a budget, not knowing what you're doing,
Right.
being in the hands of that slick tie sales guy, like, because you're going to walk out of that store with a very inferior piano if you don't want to spend more than $15,000-$20,000.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that. You don't
Right.
have to. So I'm happy to help you there. And then I'd just say, if you're interested in the songs and all that kind of stuff, if you search in YouTube, The Dad's Band, all one word. We've been doing this for 12 years. It's a lot of fun. People love coming.
Yeah.
We're going to do it again, Lord willing, next year. And if you're in the area, come. But you check out all the old videos. You know,
Yeah.
it was a good time.
I'll put links in the description.
I appreciate that.
There you
Thank
go.
Yeah.
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 Thank you so much for coming on the
Well,
show.
thank you.
This was
Jackson,
awesome.
I appreciate it.
Very helpful.
Indeed. I appreciate it. Yeah, thanks.
See you guys.